As a young kid, absolutely obsessed with all things food, I could have never imagined that my love of rich Indian curries with buttery garlic naan, or my never-ending craving of Baja fish tacos would lead me to have a platform to reach millions of people as an advocate for my other passion that happens to start with an F, feminism. My journey to being a loud and proud gender equity advocate did not come about because of any personal injustice. I fortunately was never the victim of discrimination, nor were any of the women in my life. It ended up, though, that the lack of exposure to the issue was the very thing that eventually brought it to my attention. As a young kid, I naively thought gender equity was a given. I couldn't fathom that there were people who truly believed women do not deserve the same opportunities and rights as men. This disbelief grew into an anger that ignited a fire within me. I soon became dedicated to the cause and proudly called myself a feminist. But before I could even begin to become a true, influential advocate for gender equity, I actually spent a great deal of time in what's stereotypically a woman's domain, the kitchen. As a kid, I was often bored by the traditional Jewish food my mother cooked at home, or the chicken nuggets, mac and cheese, and fish sticks that I was expected to love as a kid. Sure, I love a good bowl of cheesy pasta, who doesn't? But I wanted more. I wanted to experiment with new spices and flavors in a way that my parents just didn't know how. And while my family indulged my culinary aspirations by taking me to restaurants of all different cuisines, it was still not enough to satisfy my literal and metaphorical hunger for more. So at the age of 9, I became determined to make these more exotic foods myself. Through extensive trial and error and lots of dirty dishes, I fell in love with being in the kitchen. Not only was it a space where I could be creative, but it also had the added bonus of being able to make the food that I've always craved. And as my friends began enjoying baseball, video games, and other traditional pastimes for boys my age, I further pursued cooking. The same joy I saw my friends feel when hitting a home run or beating a super hard level in their video game, I felt throughout every step of cooking. From start to finish, cooking was just sheer bliss for me. And while you would never know by looking at me, because I have the literal metabolism of a racehorse, I've always been obsessed with food and I'm constantly eating and discussing, cooking, and thinking about food. After about a year, cooking's no longer just a pastime of mine. It's a full-blown obsession. I didn't have pictures of famous sports players on the walls of my bedroom or game consoles littering my floor. Instead, I could be found watching documentaries about northern versus southern Indian cuisine or learning how to make an authentic Mexican stew on YouTube. I had posters of Food Network stars all over my room, and under my bed were not baseball cards, but dozens and dozens of Indian pots and pans that we didn't have room for in my kitchen. No joke. At the age of 11, on a complete and total whim, I applied to be on the first ever Kids episode of Chopped, and much to my and everyone's surprise, I got on. At the time, I was excited to be on TV, but was oblivious to the multitude of opportunities and the eventual career that would emerge from this experience. After my episode aired on the Food Network, my mother suggested I start a food blog to document my culinary adventures. It was the perfect idea. I now had something that could keep up with my endless energy and excitement about food. An audience just as passionate about cooking as I was. Surprisingly, my food blog and Instagram page did very well from the start. The more I saw people enjoying my content and my following growing, the more time I devoted to the creative process of recipe development. In addition to dedicating more time to the actual cooking, I also put a great deal of effort into making each post educational. I would research the origin of the dish and share with my readers all that I learned about the various rich cultures and histories from across the globe. As I developed more recipes for my blog, I realized my iPhone camera was just not adequately capturing the stunning colors and details of my dishes. I saved up money, bought a professional grade camera and some gear, and fell in love with the art of food photography. I love being able to create a story with my food pictures, from the linens to the plates to a single flower in the very back of an image. Every detail was carefully curated to convey a message and encapsulate a moment in time. As my production quality advanced, the range of dishes I could create and the number of recipes I shared did as well. And through it all, a growing online community was following me along my journey. Throughout the process, I treated my social media and blog as not only a hobby, but a business. I made schedules of what and when I would post and kept to those deadlines as if they were as strict as the ones for my school assignments. That meant rather than indulging in lazy Sunday mornings, I set my alarm for 7 a.m., eagerly jumped out of bed, and started my day with the hopes of accomplishing as much as possible. My Sundays consisted of prepping food for that day's shoot, setting up the props for the pictures, cooking, styling, photographing the food, editing the photos, developing recipes for next week's shoot, and so much more. Soon I started capturing the attention of local press, and even national companies became interested in sponsoring my work. I was invited to host cooking demos around the country and began to view myself as not only a chef, but an entertainer as well. I loved and still love educating people and sharing my enthusiasm about food. And as I wondered how else I could further share my passion, video seemed like the natural next step. So I started making YouTube videos for my own channel where I hope to convey my recipes and excitement about food even better. Around this time, I started catching the attention of leaders in the digital space. Suddenly, while still a young teenager, I'm getting invited by executives at Instagram and Facebook to visit their New York offices for meetings. Both myself and my cooking are being featured by many of the biggest media publications, and my work is being recognized by many of my idols. As time went on, my following grew into the hundreds of thousands, but what took my career to the next level was when I started a TikTok account and grew it from 0 to 1 million followers in just 4 months with short-form, high-energy cooking and food comedy videos. To date, I've built a community of over 1.3 million fans across social media, but my platform is no longer exclusively about food. Somewhere along the way, as I began to mature into a young adult, I began to have a lot more in my mind than just food. I could have easily continued posting my new content according to the recipe for success that I'd spent the past few years perfecting. But I wanted to do more. I recognized my voice had influence, and it carried with my following as it grew rapidly. At this pivotal time in my own adolescence and social media career, I decided to switch up my usual narrative. Rather than exclusively discussing my latest recipe or new favorite food, I chose to also share my views about various polarizing issues, especially gender equity. I began to educate myself and share what I learned with my followers, hoping to create a starting point for transformative dialogue. Through all my learning, what shocked me the most was that there were many people who didn't understand or value gender equity. For me, it was something I'd always felt. It was the only thing I ever knew. Before giving this talk, I spoke to my mom about what she remembers about my journey to becoming an advocate for gender equity. She told me it seemed to have happened pretty suddenly. As young children, the only reality we know is the one immediately around us. My reality was I had a mom and a dad who, as far as I knew, were viewed in the world as equals, as I've always seen them my whole life. My father's an occupational therapist, and my mother's a high school math teacher who also is the head of the math department. Everything from income to household chores to childcare were juggled by both my mom and my dad. I wouldn't even say it was necessarily 50-50 because everyone in the family, regardless of their gender, helped out with everything in some way. So my parents didn't frown upon my early interest in cooking. It wasn't even a question whether they would support it or not. As a young child, I had no understanding that my mother, not only being a teacher of higher math education, but in a role as department chair, was far from normal in many parts of the world. Once I got older, I learned in school and online about the inequality due to gender in the world, and I was honestly shocked. My ignorance and naivety due to my young age led me to know only of a world in which all women and men were treated equally. As I learned more about women who were denied education and other basic privileges and human rights in many countries and the inequality that has existed throughout history and still exists today, my anger towards this flaw in society only deepened. I was appalled and wanted to know what I could do to do more to raise attention and personally help. That is why I would never say I became a feminist. I've always been somebody who strongly believed that women and men are equals, but eventually realized that that belief was not unanimous. Just like there's no word for people who support something as logical and vital in life, such as breathing, I didn't even know there needed to be a name for believing in the equality of the sexes. I had never known there was a concept of feminism because I couldn't comprehend that being a feminist wasn't a given. Sure, as a teenager who has a full-time career outside of social media, I've had my fair share of times I wish I didn't have to go to school. However, I didn't realize how lucky I was to have access to education. It just baffled me that whole societies don't see the many downsides of not educating half the population and denying them equal rights. The more I learned, the more questions I had. Why should any individual be denied the pleasure and excitement that comes with academic inquiry? Why can't they discover their own unique talents and passions that might lie outside of the societal norms of what they're supposed to do? It felt to me that they were in essence being denied the right to create and live their own lives with no hope in the near future of a new reality because too few people knew or even cared that these injustices were occurring. Now I know I might be the least likely person to be a spokesperson advocating for gender equity. How could I, with my upper middle class background and private school education experience, have any idea about the struggle of young women in countries that I've never even been to? There were 1,000 reasons why I was not the person to speak up, but one compelling reason why it should be me. Because I cared and could use my privilege to amplify the voices of those that don't share in the same privileges as I do. The very privilege I could have easily taken for granted was a basic human right I had to stand up for others. On International Women's Day in March of 2018, I did my first official Instagram post about feminism. Up until that point, I had talked about it before, but never as overtly as that day. The day before, I made a custom feminist shirt because after lots of searching, shocker, I couldn't find any boy-sized feminist shirts. I stepped outside into the snow, yes, it was snowing in March, to get some good lighting and had my mom snap a picture of me brandishing my homemade feminist shirt. I then spent the rest of the day writing my caption to share my message about the importance of being a feminist as articulately as possible. I knew the audience I was talking to and wrote accordingly. I needed this message to resonate with people who normally sneered or looked down upon feminism. They needed to hear why they should care and what they can do once they do care. Part of my post read, "A common misconception is that gender inequality is a woman's problem." This couldn't be more false. It is a human problem because when women are educated and treated as equals, all of humanity will benefit. Just imagine how much greater the world would be if 50% of the population weren't held back. When women are uplifted, so is the world as a whole. After that first post, I continued to use my platform to address gender equity in numerous other ways. The most public stance I took was a video I posted both on YouTube and Instagram titled "Why Every Teenage Boy Should Be a Feminist." A title that was unfortunately controversial. I started off the video by saying, "Hi, my name is Eitan Bernath, I'm a 17-year-old male, and I am a proud feminist." Then for the next 4 minutes, I tried to calmly but passionately explain my point of view in a manner intended to resonate with my audience, especially other boys my age. I talked about the inequities that exist in this world for those that weren't aware, then explained why they should care, and then once they care, how they can help. The video was met by a lot of support from both fellow boys my age as well as mothers, sisters, and fathers who were eager to show the boys and young men in their lives why they should care as well. I have never and will never have the intention of being a male savior, and therefore am very careful how I say things and what I say in order to never portray that. However, I truly believe in order to get an even more amount of people behind a cause, a diverse set of advocates is needed to speak to a diverse set of potential future advocates. I just don't think the video would have had the same effect on boys my age if it weren't coming from a peer. Now don't get me wrong, the response was not all positive. There were many people that used the comment section as a forum to either spread their misogynistic views or just hate on me for speaking about this by calling me all sorts of horrible names. I was called a plethora of misogynistic slurs that I definitely could have gone the rest of my life without knowing. One even called me a soy chugger, referring to the estrogen in soy that, according to them, made me less of a man for caring about women's rights. Rather than letting that hinder me from continuing to be an advocate, I took these comments as proof that there was a lot more work to be done. Clearly, there were a lot of people out there who needed to learn that caring about women's rights doesn't make you any less of a man. In the subsequent months, I contributed to various women-centric charities and encouraged my followers to donate as well, promising to match their funds. I firmly believe in the importance of monetarily supporting the cause, in addition to the vitality of creating dialogue. Lastly, I try to support female influencers and cookbook writers by calling attention to their work, background, and when possible, their struggles. Though social media posts reach billions of people, I believe the most important way that I advocate for gender equity is through one-on-one conversations with other young men. From my experience in doing so, it seems there's a misconception that feminism is about hating men, and thus young men feel disconnected and turned off from the conversation. In our conversations, I try to explain the concept of misandry, or the notion that men are inferior to women, which is often confused with feminism, when in reality, the two ideologies are complete opposites. I strive to break down their misconceptions and educate them on the feminist movement and its goals, as well as to bring to their attention the various injustices in the world. Lastly, I remind those who I speak with that gender inequity is not exclusively a women's issue, but a societal issue whose influence extends to both society today and future generations moving forward. Posting on social media is a great way to reach a large number of people, but the real work is done offline without the public watching. Without enacting on your advocacy in everyday life, You're simply partaking in optical activism. To me, being a genuine advocate means calling out people in everyday life, no matter how uncomfortable it is to do so. For me, that means calling out other guys that I hear saying misogynistic things about women, donating a percentage of my income to fund women's education in countries that are traditionally denied access, questioning things I'm taught to believe, and ultimately making sure that I speak up for women being treated unfairly in all parts of my life. And while not everyone has a platform that's massive that they can spread this vital message, nor is everyone in a position or an environment in which they can proudly vocalize these opinions, I encourage everyone to do what they can to bring attention to this cause and help us in our fight to establish women as equals across the globe. Thank you.